I was standing in a law office when my brother signed away my life for the second time. The paper in front of him was our mother's will. His pen moved fast, almost eager. I remembered this moment. I had lived it once already, and it had ended with me dead in a stairwell 11 months later. This time, I let him sign. My name is Elena Voss. I am 29 years old, and I have already died once. I remember the fall down those concrete stairs at Voss Industries, the sound my body made, the silence after. I remember waking up 10 days earlier than that funeral, in my own bed, my mother still alive downstairs, making coffee. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply understood what had been given to me, a second chance, and a memory Marcus didn't know I had. My mother had raised us both after our father died, treating Marcus as her own even though he came from her second marriage. She never learned what he truly was. In my first life, I never told her, because by the time I understood, she was already gone, and Marcus was already smiling at her funeral. I remembered one evening, months before she passed, when she'd mentioned Marcus almost carefully, as though testing her own words before speaking them. "He wants things too easily," she'd said, watching me over her tea. "Be careful what you hand him without asking questions." I hadn't understood what she meant then. I understood it completely now. She never accused him of anything directly. She simply planted a small, quiet doubt, one I had ignored in my first life, and one I intended to honor fully in this one. My stepbrother Marcus built his entire public image on generosity. Local papers loved him. Charity galas loved him. He smiled for cameras and called our late father's company a family legacy worth protecting. Behind that smile was a man who had quietly drained $12 million from company reserves, then covered it with forged loan documents bearing signatures that weren't his. One of those signatures was supposed to be mine. In my first life, I discovered the forgery 3 weeks after the funeral. I confronted him privately, foolishly, without proof in anyone else's hands. He panicked. 2 nights later, I was dead, and the police called it an accident. I would not make that mistake twice. I still remembered the exact words Marcus used the day he pushed me out of my old office in that other life. He'd called me unstable in front of 3 junior staff, loud enough for the whole floor to hear. He said grief had clouded my judgment, that the board deserved someone steadier. I remembered standing there, humiliated, saying nothing, because I still believed, foolishly, that decency would eventually be rewarded. This time, I carried that memory like a tool instead of a wound. I also remembered the quiet aftermath, the empty apartment, the friends who slowly stopped calling once Marcus's version of events spread further than mine ever could. I had learned, painfully, that reputation moved faster than truth unless truth arrived with proof attached. That lesson shaped every decision I made this time, long before the gala, long before Marcus ever suspected how carefully I was watching him. I intended to make certain that, this time, the truth arrived first, armed and impossible to talk away. The lawyer, a tired man named Harlan Reyes, slid the folder toward Marcus without much interest. Our mother had left the majority shares of Voss Industries to whichever sibling could demonstrate, within 30 days, that they were fit to run it. It was her strange, hopeful attempt at fairness. In my old life, I had spent those 30 days trying to prove myself through good work and honest numbers. Marcus had spent his 30 days quietly forging a loan to make the company's debt vanish on paper, just long enough to secure the board's confidence and take control outright. This time, I already knew his plan before he made it. I watched him accept the folder like a man accepting a trophy. His hand didn't shake. He believed he had already won. I let him believe it, because I understood something he never had. An inheritance built on a lie is not a gift. It is evidence waiting to be collected. Harlan closed his own copy of the will slowly, almost reluctantly. He glanced at me once, longer than necessary, before looking away again. In my first life, I had barely noticed that glance. This time, I filed it away, uncertain what it meant, only certain that it meant something. When the meeting ended, Marcus shook Harlan's hand and thanked him warmly. Then he turned to me, his smile practiced and small. "No hard feelings, Elena," he said. "Mom always did overestimate you." I smiled back, calm, unreadable. "We'll see." He laughed once, like I had made a joke, and walked out ahead of me. I stood there a moment longer, looking at the empty folder sleeve on the table, the one that would soon hold documents with my forged name on them. I had 10 days before the board vote that would make his claim permanent. 10 days to gather what I hadn't gathered the first time. Outside, the city moved the way it always had, indifferent to what had just happened inside that quiet room. I sat in my car for a long moment, replaying the version of my life that ended on cold concrete, letting the memory sharpen my resolve instead of my fear. That night, I sat at my desk with my old laptop, the same one from my first life, still holding years of financial files I had never fully understood until it was too late. This time, I understood exactly what I was looking for. I opened the internal ledger archive using my old employee credentials Marcus had forgotten to revoke because, in his mind, I had never been a real threat. Row by row, I searched for the loan account tied to the forged signature. It took me 40 minutes to find the first irregularity. A wire transfer dated the same week our father died, routed through an account with no clear owner listed. I copied the files onto a private, encrypted drive, the kind that wouldn't show up on any company backup. My hands were steady. My heart was not calm, but it was focused. I thought about calling the police immediately. In my first life, that instinct had gotten me killed because I had no proof strong enough to survive Marcus denying everything. This time, I needed more than suspicion. I needed a paper trail he couldn't explain away in a single phone call. The next morning, I drove to the company's records annex, a small building behind the main office, few employees ever visited. A records clerk named Owen recognized me immediately, waving me through without much question. "Haven't seen you down here in years," he said, only mildly curious. "Just double-checking some old files," I said, keeping my voice light. "Family business, before the transition finishes." He shrugged and let me into the archive room, rows of locked cabinets holding paper records that predated the company's digital system. I found the physical loan file within 20 minutes, buried between unrelated vendor contracts, exactly where someone might hide something they hoped no one would ever look for again. Inside was an older signature card, one used to verify handwriting against new documents. Comparing it to the forged transfer, I saw immediately how close the forgery was. Close enough to fool a distracted eye, not close enough to survive real scrutiny. I photographed both pages carefully, then returned the folder exactly as I'd found it. So I made my first real move instead. I called Dana Kessler. Dana had been our company's internal auditor for 6 years, until Marcus quietly pushed her out 8 months before my death in the old timeline, replacing her with someone loyal only to him. She had left angry, and she had left with copies of things Marcus assumed were destroyed. She answered on the 3rd ring. Wary. "Elena, it's late. I need your help," I said. About the loan restructuring from 3 years ago, there was a long pause. Why now? Because Marcus is about to use it to steal the company legally, I said. And I think you kept records that prove it's not legal at all. Another pause. Longer, this time. Then, quietly, come to my office, tomorrow morning, early, before anyone else is awake. I agreed and hung up, my pulse finally loosening a little. The next morning, I arrived at Dana's small home office before 7. She looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. On her desk sat a locked metal box. I kept these because I didn't trust him, she said, opening it. I never thought I'd need them. Inside were photocopies of internal transfer requests, 3 of them bearing a signature meant to be mine, dated from a period when I had been traveling for the company and physically unable to sign anything in person. My chest tightened looking at my own name forged in ink I had never written. This is enough to start, Dana said. Not enough to finish. I nodded slowly. Then we get more. We spent the next hour mapping out what still existed and where. A shell account overseas. A secondary loan used to quietly repay the first one before anyone noticed the shortfall. A junior accountant, Priya Malhotra, who had once mentioned discomfort about a transfer she'd processed without full authorization. Dana wrote it all down, while I photographed every page in the metal box, twice, storing copies in 2 separate places. You understand what happens if you're wrong about any of this, Dana said, not unkindly. He'll destroy you before the board even hears your name. I know exactly what he's capable of, I said, and something in my voice must have carried more weight than she expected, because she studied me for a moment before nodding. Before I left, Dana mentioned something else, almost as an afterthought. There was a clause in your father's original trust, she said. Something about integrity conditions. I never understood it fully. Harlan handled that side, not me. I filed that detail away too, uncertain of its meaning, sensing it might matter later. I left her office with the beginning of a real case, and 10 days feeling suddenly much shorter than they had before. That afternoon, the board announced an emergency session. Marcus had moved faster than expected, presenting the resolved debt structure as proof of his leadership before the 30-day period even ended. In my old life, this was the moment I lost. In this one, I walked into the boardroom already collecting the evidence that would bury him. Marcus stood at the head of the table, radiant with confidence, showing charts that made the company's finances look stable for the first time in years. Board members nodded, visibly relieved. One woman, Constance On, glanced my way with something like sympathy, as though she already assumed I had lost. With the debt restructured, Marcus said smoothly, I believe I've demonstrated exactly the leadership our mother hoped for. A few members murmured agreement. I said nothing yet. I only watched him point to a chart showing the loan repayment, the very loan built on forged approval. When the vote to formally recommend him came, it passed 8-1. Only Constance abstained. Marcus looked at me afterward, almost gentle in his victory. This doesn't have to be ugly, Elena. You could still have a role here, under me. I met his eyes, steady, unhurried. I'll think about it. He nodded, satisfied, already turning away to accept congratulations from the others. I stayed seated a moment longer, watching him celebrate a win built on a lie only I could prove. In my first life, this had been the moment everything collapsed for me. In this one, it was only the beginning. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. It was Priya, the junior accountant Dana had mentioned. I heard you're asking questions, the message read. I think I processed something I shouldn't have. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling the shape of the 10 days ahead of me settle into something clearer, something almost like a plan. I typed back a single word, tomorrow. Then I set the phone down, closed my laptop, and allowed myself, finally, one slow breath. Marcus had taken the shares. He believed the war was already over. He had no idea. It had only just started. I met Priya the next morning at a coffee shop, 2 blocks from her office, far enough that no one from Voss Industries would recognize either of us. She looked younger up close, maybe 24, with the kind of nervous energy people carry when they've done nothing wrong but feel guilty anyway. I only processed the transfer because I was told it was routine, she said quietly, wrapping both hands around her cup. Standard vendor payment, that's what the note said. But it wasn't routine, I said gently. No. She pulled a folded printout from her bag, sliding it across the table like it burned her fingers. I kept a copy because something felt wrong. The signature authorizing it didn't match anything I'd seen from you before. I looked down at the page. My name, my forged signature, approving a transfer to an account I had never heard of. Who gave you the authorization? I asked. Marcus's assistant, she said. But the request came from his private email, not the company system. That detail mattered more than she realized. Private correspondence outside company channels meant intent, not oversight. It meant Marcus had known exactly what he was doing. Would you testify to that, if it came to it? I asked carefully. Priya hesitated, fear flickering across her face. I could lose my job. You could also lose more if this comes out, and you're the one who signed off on it without saying anything, I said, not unkindly. I'm not asking you to accuse anyone publicly yet. I'm asking you to keep telling the truth, quietly, to people who can protect you. She was silent for a long moment, then nodded once. Okay, I'll help. I thanked her, and we agreed to stay in contact only through a private channel Dana had already set up, one that wouldn't trace back through company servers. Walking out of the coffee shop, I felt the shape of the case sharpening. A forged signature, a private email trail, a frightened witness willing to confirm the timeline. It wasn't finished, but it was real. That afternoon, Marcus called a company-wide meeting to formally announce his transition into full leadership. I watched from the back of the room as he stood beneath the Voss Industries banner, thanking employees for their patience during what he called a difficult transitional year. He was good at this. Warm voice, easy smile, the practiced humility of a man who wanted to seem humbled by power rather than hungry for it. I know some of you had questions about the restructuring, he said, scanning the room. I promise you, every decision was made with total transparency. My jaw tightened at the word transparency, but I kept my expression neutral. Beside me, Constance Ahn leaned slightly closer. You've been quiet, she murmured. I'm choosing my moment, I said. She studied me, curiosity replacing her earlier sympathy. You know something. I know a lot of things, I said. I'm making sure I know enough. She didn't press further, but something shifted in her expression, like she'd decided to watch more carefully from now on. After the meeting, Marcus found me near the elevators, that same easy smile still in place. You handled that well, he said. No scene. I appreciate it. I'm not interested in scenes, I said. I'm interested in facts. Something flickered behind his eyes, brief and unreadable. Facts support me, Elena. The board saw the numbers. The board saw what you showed them, I said, and let the silence after that sentence do its own work. He laughed it off, but I saw the small hesitation before he stepped into the elevator, the way his hand lingered a moment too long on the door. He wasn't as certain as he wanted to appear. That evening, Dana called with new information. She'd traced the overseas account further back, connecting it to a shell company registered under an associate of Marcus's, a man named Victor Cole, who ran a small consulting firm that had done almost no visible work for Voss Industries in 3 years. Victor's been paid over $400,000 for services no one can describe, Dana said. That money moves right back toward the loan repayment structure Marcus presented to the board. So the loan wasn't actually repaid, I said slowly. It was laundered to look repaid. Exactly, Dana said, which means the debt is still real. He just hid it well enough to fool people who wanted to be fooled. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the full shape of it settle. This wasn't a single, forged signature anymore. It was a structured, deliberate fraud, built to survive scrutiny just long enough for Marcus to seize control. We need Victor, I said. Or at least proof, connecting him directly to Marcus, beyond the payments. I might have something, Dana said. An old email thread, before Marcus tightened his security. I saved it before I left. I never used it because I didn't think anyone would believe me alone. Send it to me tonight, I said, encrypted. She agreed, and within the hour, I had it. A short exchange between Marcus and Victor, casual in tone, terrifyingly clear in content. Marcus referring to the loan as the cover. Victor confirming the funds had been cleaned and routed. No ambiguity. No plausible deniability. I read it 3 times. My hands steady, my mind already moving toward the next step. This alone wouldn't be enough to present publicly yet. Emails could be challenged, questioned, framed as taken out of context by a skilled enough lawyer. I needed the paper trail Dana had traced to align cleanly with financial records the board itself would recognize as undeniable. I needed an ally inside the boardroom, and I needed the company's outside partners to notice the cracks before Marcus could smooth them over again. The next morning brought the first real consequence. Small, but unmistakable. A compliance officer from the company's primary bank called the finance office, flagging unusual activity on the account tied to the shell company payments. Word reached Marcus within the hour, and Constance told me later that he'd shut his office door for nearly 40 minutes afterward. By early afternoon, one of the company's smaller outside investors quietly withdrew a pending funding commitment, citing timing concerns in a brief, carefully worded email. It wasn't public yet. It wasn't catastrophic yet, but it was real, a small crack in the confidence structure Marcus had built for the board. Constance forwarded me the investor's email later that evening, along with her own observation. Timing concerns usually mean someone's accountant asked a question nobody wanted to answer, she wrote. This isn't nothing, Elena. I read the message twice, understanding exactly what she meant. Investors rarely walked away from a promising deal without a specific reason, even one they weren't willing to state plainly. Somewhere, quietly, someone had already begun noticing the same irregularities I was gathering evidence to prove. I felt something settle in my chest, quiet and certain. The trap wasn't only mine to spring anymore. It was starting to spring itself. Constance On's earlier curiosity gave me an idea before I even reached Priya's information. She was sharp, cautious, and clearly unconvinced by Marcus's easy charm. She had abstained from the vote instead of opposing it outright, which told me she wasn't fully in his camp, but she wasn't ready to fight him either. I invited her to meet privately the next day, at a small restaurant away from company eyes. She arrived precisely on time, watchful as always. You said this was important. It is, I said. I need you to see something, and I need you to keep it quiet until I say otherwise. I showed her the transfer document with the forged signature, then explained what Dana had traced through the shell account. I watched her expression shift from professional composure to genuine alarm as she listened. This is fraud, she said quietly. Serious fraud. Yes, I said. Why show me this now, instead of taking it straight to the authorities? Because if I go too early, with incomplete evidence, he'll frame it as a jealous stepsister trying to sabotage him, I said. I need the case airtight, and I need someone inside the boardroom who understands exactly what she's looking at when the moment comes. Constance was quiet for a long moment, turning her coffee cup slowly on the table. What do you need from me? For now, just watch, I said. Don't confront him, don't tip him off. Just pay attention to any financial decisions he makes in the next week. Documents, approvals, anything unusual. She nodded slowly. And when you're ready? When I'm ready, I'll need you to stand with me in that room, I said. Not before. She extended her hand, and I shook it, feeling the quiet weight of a real alliance forming. 2 days passed with careful, deliberate movement. Priya sent a second document confirming another questionable transfer. Dana cross-referenced dates against public filings, building a clean, undeniable timeline. Constance quietly flagged an unusual expense approval Marcus pushed through without full board review. A small but telling sign of overreach. Marcus, meanwhile, grew more confident by the day, unaware that every step he took forward was tightening a structure closing in around him. He also grew careless in small ways, the kind of carelessness that follows a man who believes he has already survived the worst of it. He gave an interview to a local business magazine, calling the restructuring the cleanest financial turnaround this company has ever seen. I read the quote twice, almost admiring the confidence of a lie spoken that plainly. On the 5th day, he scheduled a private dinner, ostensibly to smooth things over between us. I accepted, curious what he wanted. We met at an upscale restaurant downtown. Marcus dressed impeccably, ordering wine before I'd even sat down. I want us to be on the same side, Elena, he said, once the waiter left. You're smart. You could be useful to me, instead of standing in my way. Useful how? I asked. Oversight committee. A title with weight, but no real power to interfere, he said, smiling like he was offering me something generous. It would look good, publicly. Family unity, after everything with Mom. I studied him for a long moment. You're worried about something. His smile flickered, just barely. I'm not worried. I'm being practical. You're worried I know something, I said quietly. The silence that followed lasted only a second too long before he laughed it off. You always did overthink things. I smiled, calm, unreadable, the same smile I'd given him in the lawyer's office days earlier. Maybe, or maybe I finally understand exactly what you're capable of. Something cold passed behind his eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. He raised his glass instead, steering the conversation back to safer, shallower topics. But I noticed his hand wasn't quite as steady as before. Near the end of the dinner, he mentioned, almost casually, that he'd been reviewing old employee access logs. Just cleaning up loose ends, he said, watching me carefully. Some people still have credentials they shouldn't. My stomach tightened, though I kept my face still. He suspected something, even if he didn't know what yet. Sounds reasonable, I said evenly. I'm sure whatever you find will explain itself. He studied me a moment longer, then let the subject drop, though I understood the warning underneath it. My window with the archive credentials was closing. He believed he still controlled the narrative. He had no idea the narrative was already being written, quietly, meticulously, by people he had underestimated for years. Later that night, Constance called with urgent news. Marcus had scheduled an emergency shareholder gala in 4 days, framed publicly as a celebration of new leadership, Privately, she suspected. As a final push to secure investor confidence before anyone could question the numbers further. "He's moving up the timeline," Constance said. "He knows something's wrong. He just doesn't know what or how much you have." I told her about the access logs, and she was quiet for a moment. "Then we move faster too," she said, "before he closes any more doors." The next morning, I called Priya again, this time with more urgency in my voice. "Marcus is auditing old system access," I said. "If he traces anything back to you, I need to know before it happens, not after." "He already asked me something strange yesterday," Priya admitted, "about whether I'd shared any documents outside the company." I told him no. "Did he believe you?" "I don't know," she said, her voice tightening. "He didn't push, but he watched me longer than usual before he left." She described the moment in careful detail. Marcus's assistant had stopped by her desk near closing time, asking casual questions about her workload, then mentioning, almost offhand, "That loyalty gets noticed around here." Priya said she'd smiled and nodded, betraying nothing, though her hands had trembled once he walked away. "That's not a question," I said. "That's a warning." "I know," she said quietly. "I just don't know how much longer I can act like everything's fine." "A few more days," I told her. "Then none of us will need to pretend anymore." I felt the first real edge of risk settle over the plan, sharper than before. Priya wasn't just a witness anymore. She was exposed. And if Marcus moved against her first, an important piece of my case could disappear before I ever reached the gala. That same week, I made a quiet decision I hadn't planned on making so soon. I reached out to Naomi Kessler, a financial journalist, Dana, trusted from years of honest reporting, careful not to reveal specifics yet. "I might have a story for you soon," I told her over the phone. "Corporate fraud, verified documents, a public reveal. I need someone who won't rush it before it's ready." "I don't chase rumors," Naomi said. "But I listen when someone sounds this careful." "I am," I said. "I just need a little more time." She agreed to wait, promising nothing beyond attention, which was exactly what I needed. A journalist watching quietly from a distance would matter enormously once the gala finally arrived. Someone capable of confirming what the room witnessed, rather than simply repeating what Marcus wanted printed. "Keep everything you have in a place only you control," I told her. "Not company email, not company drives. If he tries to remove you, I need proof of what you already gave us, safely outside his reach." She promised she would, though I could hear the fear underneath her voice. That afternoon, I met Dana again, laying out everything that had shifted, the bank compliance flag, the withdrawn investor, Marcus's access log review, the moved-up gala. "He's panicking quietly," Dana said, studying the timeline spread across her table, "which means he might start making mistakes. Or he might start burning evidence," I said. "We need to move faster than his fear does." Dana nodded, already reaching for her laptop. "I have one more lead. An old audit request Marcus rejected 2 years ago, when I still worked there. It would have caught the loan structure early if he'd allowed it to proceed. Why didn't it?" "Because he told the board it was unnecessary," Dana said. "I have the email where he blocked it personally." Another clean, damning piece, another thread pulling tighter around him. I left her office that evening, with a growing certainty that the structure I was building could survive whatever scrutiny Marcus's lawyers eventually threw at it. What worried me now wasn't the strength of the case. It was the shrinking amount of time left to finish it safely. The following day brought a small, sharp victory for Marcus, the kind meant to reassure a nervous board. He announced a new partnership with a regional distributor, presenting it publicly as proof of renewed stability under his leadership. Board members applauded. Shareholders seemed reassured. For one afternoon, his confidence looked entirely justified again. I let him have that moment. False wins, I had learned the hard way, only mattered if no one remembered them afterward. Not everyone on the board shared his confidence, though. Constance told me later that one older director, a cautious man named Preston Ward, had quietly asked Marcus for additional documentation behind closed doors, unsatisfied with the distributor announcement alone. Marcus had brushed the request aside smoothly, promising details once the transition fully settles. Preston hadn't pushed further that day, but Constance said his expression stayed skeptical long after everyone else applauded. Small doubts like that mattered more than Marcus realized. A board that trusted him completely would have been far harder to move once the truth finally surfaced. A board with even one quietly watchful skeptic gave the evidence somewhere safe to land. That night, Constance sent a message confirming the Gala's final guest list, including 2 financial journalists Marcus had personally courted for months, hoping their coverage would cement his leadership narrative before anyone could challenge it publicly. I stared at the list for a long time, recognizing the shape of an opportunity rather than a threat. If Marcus wanted an audience prepared to believe him, I would give that same audience a reason to believe me instead. The gala was set for 4 days from now, in the same ballroom where our mother once hosted her final company anniversary. I spent the first 2 of those days building something no lawyer could dismiss as coincidence or bias. Dana finished mapping the shell company's full transaction history. Every payment to Victor Cole matched, almost to the day, a corresponding withdrawal from the loan account bearing my forged signature. The pattern was too clean, too deliberate, to be anything but design. "This isn't sloppy fraud," Dana said, spreading the timeline across her kitchen table. "This is someone who thought he'd never be questioned." "He never was," I said quietly. "Not the first time." She glanced at me, curious about the phrase, but didn't ask further. I didn't explain. Priya sent a 3rd document that evening, a routing confirmation showing the exact date the forged transfer cleared, 3 days before I had even returned from a business trip that made it physically impossible for me to have signed anything in person. That detail alone would matter enormously. A signature dated during a verified absence wasn't just suspicious, it was proof. I called Constance immediately. "I need the board's original travel records for that quarter," I said. "Whatever the company kept on file for my trip, I can pull them tomorrow," she said, quietly. "Quietly is important," I said. "If Marcus senses we're building something, he'll try to bury it before the gala." "He already senses something," Constance said. "He's been erratic the last 2 days, snapping at assistants, rescheduling meetings twice in one afternoon. That was useful information. A man who felt safe didn't behave like that." Somewhere beneath his composed public image, Marcus knew the ground beneath him was no longer solid. Constance mentioned one more thing before hanging up. Marcus had asked her, almost casually, whether she'd spoken with me recently outside official meetings. She'd told him no, keeping her voice light, though she admitted afterward her pulse had spiked at the question. "He's starting to suspect the 2 of us," she said. "Not enough to act on it yet. Enough to start watching." "Then we stay careful," I told her. "A few more days. That's all we need." She agreed, though I could hear the tension settling into her voice, the same tension I recognized from my own chest every time I considered how quickly things could still go wrong before the gala arrived. That same afternoon, a different kind of pressure reached me directly. A message arrived from an unfamiliar law firm, warning me in careful language, against making unsubstantiated claims that could damage Marcus's reputation ahead of the gala. It wasn't a lawsuit yet. It was a threat dressed politely as caution. I read it twice, feeling the old fear from my first life brush against me, cold and familiar. This time, I didn't let it stop me. I forwarded the letter to Constance, who confirmed Marcus's own legal counsel had sent it without full board authorization. Another small overreach that would matter later. Later that evening, a car I didn't recognize idled outside my building for nearly 20 minutes before finally pulling away. I couldn't prove it was connected to Marcus, and I didn't call the police over something so uncertain. Still, I checked the locks twice before going to bed, aware that pressure like this rarely stayed only on paper for long. I called Dana afterward, not out of panic, but out of caution. If something happens to me before the gala, I said carefully, everything needs to already be in your hands, not just mine. It already is, she said. I copied every file the moment you sent it. You're not carrying this alone, Elena. Hearing that steadied me more than I expected it to. I sat for a while afterward, listening to the quiet of my apartment, replaying every version of this fight I had lived through. The first time, I had faced Marcus alone, certain that honesty alone would be enough to protect me. This time, I had built something sturdier than honesty by itself, patience woven together with proof and people willing to stand beside both. Whatever waited outside that idling car, whatever pressure Marcus still hoped to apply before the gala, I no longer felt like the same woman who had once died believing she had no real defense against him. The next morning, Constance secured my travel confirmation from the company archive, an official record showing me in another country the exact week the forged signature was dated. She photographed it and sent it through our private channel, alongside a note. "This is undeniable," she wrote. "Even his own lawyers won't be able to argue around it." I stared at the image for a long moment, feeling something settle inside me, quiet and certain. In my first life, I never found proof this clean. I had suspicion, fear, and a stairwell waiting for me at the end of it. This time, I had dates, documents, and witnesses. That afternoon, Victor Cole made an unexpected move. He requested a private meeting with Marcus at a downtown office building, the same one listed as his consulting firm's address, though the building directory showed no company registered under that name. Dana had someone she trusted watching the entrance, an old contact from her auditing days who owed her a favor. He confirmed Victor arrived agitated, staying only 12 minutes before leaving in visible frustration. "Something's wrong between them," Dana told me later. "Victor doesn't look like a man confident in the plan anymore." Dana's contact mentioned one more detail before leaving. Victor had made a phone call from the sidewalk afterward, pacing, visibly agitated, before finally getting into a cab alone. Whatever Marcus had said inside that meeting, it hadn't reassured him. "People who feel protected don't pace on sidewalks," Dana said. "People who feel like the next target do." That gave me an idea. Before approaching Victor, I returned once more to the record's annex, drawn back by something Dana had said about an original paper ledger, predating the digital system entirely. Owen let me in, without question again, distracted by his own paperwork. I found the ledger in the bottom drawer of an unmarked cabinet, its leather cover cracked with age, the same dust and paper smell I remembered from childhood visits to my father's office. Flipping carefully through brittle pages, I found an entry in my father's own handwriting, referencing an integrity provision tied to the company's ownership structure, dated years before his death. It matched exactly what Dana had mentioned in passing about the trust. I photographed the page with careful hands, uncertain yet what it meant, only certain it belonged with the rest of the evidence I was building. If Victor felt exposed, he might be the weakest link in Marcus's structure, someone more interested in protecting himself than protecting his partner. I reached out to him directly the next day, careful, deliberate, framing myself not as an accuser, but as someone offering him a way out before everything collapsed publicly. We met at a quiet cafe far from downtown, Victor visibly uneasy the moment he sat down. "I don't know what you think you know," he said immediately, "but I haven't done anything illegal." "I'm not here to threaten you," I said calmly. "I'm here because I think you're about to take a fall that isn't fully yours to take." His eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "Marcus built this entire structure," I said. "The shell company, the routing, the false loan repayment. You executed pieces of it, but the fraud itself, the forged signature authorizing the original transfer, that's his design, not yours." Victor was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. "If this comes out," I continued, "the person who cooperates early looks very different from the person who gets caught hiding it." He studied me, something shifting behind his guarded expression. "What would cooperating look like?" "A signed statement," I said, confirming Marcus directed the transfers, and confirming the loan was never genuinely repaid. In exchange, I make it clear to the board, and, if it comes to that, to investigators, that you acted under his direction, not your own initiative." Victor exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. He said this would never be traced back this far. "He was wrong," I said simply. After a long silence, Victor nodded once. "I'll write it. But I want assurance you'll actually protect me in this, not just use me and disappear." "You have my word," I said, and meant it. He agreed to deliver the signed statement before the gala, giving me the final piece I needed, direct testimony connecting Marcus explicitly to the fraud's origin. That evening, Priya called, her voice tight with fear. "Marcus's assistant told me my role is being restructured after the gala," she said. "I think they're planning to remove me quietly, before anyone asks questions." I closed my eyes briefly, feeling the weight of every person who had trusted me with something fragile. "You've already given us everything that matters," I told her. "Whatever happens after the gala, I'll make sure your name is protected, not buried." She was quiet for a moment. "I believe you," she finally said, though I could hear how much courage that sentence cost her. That night, I laid every document across my desk, the forged signature, the travel record proving its impossibility, the email thread between Marcus and Victor, the shell company's transaction history, Priya's testimony, Victor's coming statement, Dana's full financial timeline. It wasn't circumstantial anymore. It was a structure, complete, undeniable, ready to be presented in the one room Marcus couldn't control. The gala was 2 days away. Marcus, unaware of how close the walls had drawn around him, called me the following morning, his voice carrying a strained warmth I recognized immediately as performance. "I want you seated at the main table," he said, "beside me. Show everyone the family stands together." "That sounds appropriate," I said evenly, "given everything that's about to be revealed." There was a pause, brief but telling. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm looking forward to the gala," I said, and let the ambiguity sit between us like a blade neither of us acknowledged directly. He recovered quickly, laughing it off with practiced ease, but I heard the small catch in his breath before he changed the subject. He was afraid now, even if he couldn't name exactly why. The final day before the gala, Constance confirmed the board would be fully present, along with major shareholders and several press contacts Marcus had personally invited to showcase his new era of leadership. It was, unintentionally, the perfect audience. Every person capable of stripping him of power in a single evening would be sitting in that room. Naomi confirmed quietly that she would attend as well, seated among the other journalists, notebook ready, waiting to see whether the story I'd promised her would finally arrive. I hadn't told her the details yet. I'd only told her to watch closely and to trust what she saw with her own eyes over anything printed on a program. "I don't need details in advance," she said. "I need the truth to hold up once it's public. That's all I've ever needed." It was exactly the kind of scrutiny I wanted standing beside me that night. Dana finished preparing physical copies of the full evidence packet, organized clearly enough for anyone unfamiliar with financial records to understand within minutes. Priya sent a final message, confirming she was ready to speak if called upon, her fear now steadied by resolve. Victor's signed statement arrived that evening. Precise, damning, unmistakably clear. I read it twice, then set it beside the rest of the folder, complete now. Ready, I thought, briefly, of the version of me who had died in a stairwell without any of this. She had confronted Marcus with nothing but suspicion and honesty, believing decency alone would be enough to expose him. It hadn't been. This time, I wasn't relying on decency. I was relying on evidence he couldn't out-talk, out-charm, or outmaneuver in front of an audience he needed to believe him. That night, I stood before my mirror, steady, calm, the folder resting closed on the table behind me. Tomorrow, Marcus would stand beneath the same banner where he'd once celebrated stealing everything from me. He would smile for cameras, thank the board, and welcome shareholders into a future built on fraud. He believed the fight was already won. He had no idea I was about to hand him the very rope he had used to hang me the first time, tightened now around his own hands instead. The ballroom looked exactly as I remembered from the version of my life where I never got this chance. Crystal chandeliers, white orchids, a banner overhead reading Voss Industries, a new era. Marcus stood near the entrance, greeting shareholders with practiced warmth, his hands steady on every handshake. I arrived carrying nothing but a slim leather folder and a calm I had earned, not performed. Constance met me near the bar, her expression tight with focus. "The press contacts are seated near the front," she murmured. "Board members are all here. Everyone's watching him tonight." "Good," I said quietly. "Then everyone will see this clearly." Dana had positioned herself near the audiovisual booth, a printed copy of the full evidence packet ready in her bag, backup files loaded onto a drive in case anything needed projecting. Priya sat near the side entrance, nervous but present, exactly as promised. Victor hadn't come, understandably, but his signed statement sat inside my folder, ready to speak for him. Marcus took the stage 20 minutes into the evening, raising a glass toward the crowd. "Tonight isn't just about leadership," he said, voice smooth, rehearsed. "It's about honoring my mother's legacy and proving this company's finances have never been stronger." Applause rippled through the room. I watched him bask in it, unaware the floor beneath him had already shifted. "I'd like to invite my sister up," he added, gesturing toward me with practiced generosity. "Family unity matters, especially after everything we've been through." It was theater, meant to paint him gracious. I accepted the invitation anyway, walking calmly toward the stage, folder in hand. He handed me the microphone with a smile that faltered slightly when he noticed what I was carrying. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, turning toward the audience. "I do want to talk about the company's finances tonight. Specifically, the loan restructuring you all approved." His smile stiffened. 3 weeks ago, I continued, voice steady, unhurried, Marcus presented documentation showing a $12 million debt fully resolved. I'd like to show you what actually happened to that money. I opened the folder, nodding toward Dana, who activated the projector. The first document appeared behind me, the forged transfer authorization bearing my signature. A murmur moved through the crowd. This signature is mine, I said. Except I was traveling internationally the exact week it was dated, verified by the company's own travel records. The second slide appeared. My travel confirmation, dates aligned unmistakably with the forged transfer. Marcus stepped forward, voice tight. Elena, this isn't the place. It's exactly the place, I said calmly, not raising my voice. You chose this room. You chose this audience. I nodded again, and the third document appeared. The email exchange between Marcus and Victor Cole, casual, damning, undeniable in its language. Gasps replaced murmurs now. Several board members exchanged alarmed glances. A journalist near the front had already begun typing. The loan wasn't repaid, I continued. It was laundered through a shell company registered to Victor Cole. An associate paid over $400,000 for services that never existed. Marcus's composure cracked visibly, his jaw tight, eyes darting toward the exits. This is fabricated, he said sharply. Some elaborate attempt to discredit me before the board vote. Then perhaps you'd like to explain this, I said, nodding toward Dana again. The final document appeared. Victor's signed statement, clearly naming Marcus as the architect of the fraud from its inception. The room fell into stunned silence. Constance rose from her seat, addressing the board directly. I've independently verified portions of this evidence over the past week. The travel records, the shell company payments, all confirmed through legitimate channels. Preston Ward, the cautious director who had quietly doubted the distributor announcement days earlier, rose slowly from his seat, visibly shaken. This needs immediate investigation. We cannot proceed with any leadership transition tonight. I asked for documentation on this exact restructuring weeks ago, Preston added, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. I was told there was nothing more to see. I understand now why I was told that. Marcus turned toward me, something desperate flashing behind his eyes. Elena, please, we're family. You forged my signature, I said quietly, only loud enough for those closest to hear. You let me carry the weight of a crime you committed, and you were prepared to let it destroy me completely. I didn't say the rest. The part only I remembered, the stairwell, the silence, the death he never had to answer for the first time. He didn't need to know that part. He only needed to understand this life's consequences. Security, quietly summoned by Constance earlier that evening, approached the stage. Marcus's public composure shattered entirely as reporters began capturing every second. This isn't over, he said, low, furious, meant only for me. No, I agreed calmly. It's just beginning. For the people who'll investigate you properly now. He was escorted from the ballroom moments later, his image, so carefully built over years, collapsing in real time under the weight of everything he'd hidden. Naomi approached me briefly as the room settled into stunned conversation, notebook already filling with careful shorthand. I'll need copies of what's verifiable, she said, professional despite the chaos around us. Nothing exaggerated. Just what actually holds. Everything I showed tonight holds, I told her. Dana can walk you through the full timeline whenever you're ready. She nodded once, already turning toward Dana. Exactly the kind of careful, unhurried reporting I had hoped the evening would earn. Harlan Reyes approached me quietly once the room began to empty, holding a slim envelope I didn't recognize. "There's something I should have mentioned sooner," he said, his earlier reluctance suddenly making sense. "Your mother left a sealed codicil, to be opened only if serious wrongdoing was proven against either of you before the transition finished." My breath caught as he handed it to me. "She suspected something," near the end, Harlan admitted. "She never had proof. She only had instinct, and she trusted whichever of you acted with integrity to eventually find the truth." Inside the envelope was a single page in our mother's handwriting, naming me sole inheritor of the company should fraud ever be confirmed against Marcus. It wasn't manipulation from beyond the grave. It was a quiet, careful safeguard, waiting patiently for exactly this moment. I understood then why Harlan had watched me so closely in that first meeting, why his reluctance had never truly been indifference at all. The board convened an emergency session within days. Marcus was formally removed from all leadership positions, his shares frozen pending investigation. Regulatory authorities opened a full inquiry into the shell company and its transactions. Victor cooperated fully, his earlier statement becoming the foundation of a broader case against Marcus alone. Priya kept her position, eventually promoted under new, more careful oversight. Dana returned to Voss Industries as head auditor, this time with authority no one could quietly strip away. Constance was elected interim chair, trusted by a board that finally understood the value of careful, quiet vigilance. Naomi published her story 2 days after the gala, careful and precise, built entirely on documents the board itself had already verified. It didn't sensationalize the fraud. It simply laid out the timeline, clearly enough that no one could later claim confusion about what had happened. Inside the company, the mood shifted slowly from shock to something steadier. Employees who had once whispered nervously about Marcus's temper began speaking openly about the changes taking shape under new leadership. Owen, from the records annex, stopped me in the hallway one afternoon, simply to say he was glad the old files had finally mattered for something honest. Victor's cooperation shortened his own legal exposure considerably. Though he still faced consequences for his role in the laundering scheme, Marcus faced far more. Formal charges that would take months to resolve, his public image dismantled as thoroughly as the fraud itself had once been hidden. Preston Ward became one of the board's steadiest voices during the transition, insisting on independent reviews for every major decision going forward. He mentioned once, almost apologetically, that he wished he'd pushed harder when he first sensed something wrong. "You pushed exactly hard enough to matter," I told him. "The rest just needed time to surface properly." He seemed to accept that, settling into his new role with quiet diligence, the kind the company had clearly needed for longer than anyone had realized. With the Codicil formally validated by the board's legal counsel, I was named sole controlling owner, a title I accepted with far more caution than triumph. I accepted, but not immediately, and not without conditions of my own. Transparency clauses, independent audits, protections for anyone who might one day need to speak up the way Priya once had. Weeks later, I stood in my mother's old office, now mine, sunlight falling gently across her desk. I thought of the version of myself who never got this chance, who trusted too easily and paid for it with her life. I kept the old ledger from the records annex on a shelf near the window, its cracked leather cover a quiet reminder of how far back the truth had actually reached. Some evenings, I opened it just to see my father's handwriting again, steady proof that someone else had once cared enough to build in a safeguard. Neither of us fully understood until it mattered. Priya stopped by my office one afternoon, more confident than the nervous young woman who had first messaged me in fear. "I never thought speaking up would actually change anything," she admitted. "I'm glad I was wrong. You weren't just speaking up, I told her. You were the reason any of this held together at all. Dana visited less often, busy rebuilding the audit systems Marcus had spent years quietly weakening. But she called occasionally, always practical, always precise. Constance settled comfortably into her role as chair, steady in a way the board clearly needed after everything that had happened. This time, I hadn't needed violence or vengeance built on anger alone. I had needed patience, evidence, and people willing to tell the truth once someone finally gave them a safe way to do it. Marcus's downfall wasn't a moment of cruelty. It was the quiet, inevitable weight of a lie, finally meeting daylight. I thought, one last time, of the mother who had left behind a warning I once ignored and a safeguard I nearly never found in time. I hoped, wherever she was, she understood that her caution hadn't been wasted. I closed the office door softly behind me, breathing in the calm of a life I had, this time protected with my own hands.